Thank you all for joining today's webinar on Community-Centric Minigrids Toolkit and Insights. My name is Zihe Meng, and I'm a manager at RMI, an implementation partner of the Africa Minigrid Program. I'm excited to host today's webinar together with colleagues and partners to dive a bit into the topic of community-centric minigrids in Africa. Thank you all for your interest and for joining us today. Quick note that we will have French interpretation for the webinar. To access that, kindly go to the toolbox in the Zoom screen and click on the globe one that says interpretation and select French if you need to use the service. In this webinar, there are a few objectives we hope to achieve. We hope to introduce a framework for community-centric approach, share hands-on experiences and learnings on the topic, and probably more importantly, to create some space for the interested partners like yourself to discuss the topic further. The webinar is designed to be engaging and informative, and we invite you to ask questions and share your ideas throughout the webinar using the Q&A function. Let's meet today's speakers. We have a great roster today with representatives from development partner, minigrid developers, NGOs, sector experts, and I believe we can have a various global perspective to provide on the topic, and hoping we can have some rich discussions. And let's have an overview of the agenda. We will spend the first 10 minutes welcoming you all and providing some background context. And then you will hear 3 presentations on community-centric approach and tools, and with a light Q&A at the end for about 30 minutes total. Then we will have a 30-minute panel discussion highlighting some field experiences and learnings. Then we will have an open Q&A before we close out. First, I would like to hand it over to Faris for a brief introduction of the Africa Minigrid Program, AMP. Faris is a regional technical advisor at UNDP. He's an experienced energy professional who has worked with UNDP on clean energy and climate change for 18 years in New York, Bangkok, and Addis Ababa. Over to you, Faris.
Thank you, Zaha, and it's great to connect with all of you, and also great to see the large turnout for this webinar. I'm very pleased to join this timely discussion on community-centric approaches to minigrids. Before we dive into the topic, I'd like to briefly introduce the Africa Minigrids Program, or AMP, under which this session is being organized. Perhaps we can go to the next slide. AMP is a country-led technical assistance program designed to accelerate the deployment of renewable energy minigrids across Africa. Our objective is to increase access to clean energy by improving financial viability and promoting scaled-up commercial investment in minigrids. We do this with a strong focus on cost reduction levers and innovative business models. The program is led by UNDP, funded mainly by the Global Environment Facility, the GEF, and delivered in collaboration with RMI and the African Development Bank. AMP represents UNDP's most ambitious energy access program in terms of country coverage, with 21 national projects across Africa, supported by a regional platform that serves as the hub for advocacy, coordination, and knowledge management. This regional component is critical for sharing lessons, harmonizing approaches, and building capacity across countries. The national projects are grouped into 3 cohorts. The first cohort launched in 2022, and the last projects will be starting soon. Currently, 15 of the 21 projects are under active implementation. Notably, each project includes minigrid pilots, so we're already gathering valuable lessons, stories, and data from the field. We can go to the next slide. Let me give you a sense of the scale and diversity of AMP. As I mentioned, AMP spans 21 countries across sub-Saharan Africa, and this includes large and small markets, Anglophone, Francophone, and Lusophone countries, as well as small island developing states and post-crisis contexts. Together, these countries host an estimated 400 million people without electricity, more than 2/3 of the 571 million people in sub-Saharan Africa that lack access. AMP is designed to help close this gap. In today's session, we'll explore why community involvement in mini-grid design and implementation is so critical. We'll look at how adopting a community-centric approach can deliver real value while also addressing some of the challenges that previous community-led models have faced. In our experience, integrating community perspectives into mini-grid design and delivery is essential for long-term success. Within AMP, this topic is being actively discussed across all participating countries. Our mini-grid pilots are engaging communities in different ways, tailored to local contexts and capacities, and informed by lessons from past experience. We hope the toolkit we've developed, together with this webinar, will be useful more broadly across the sector. We're also eager to hear our panelists' perspectives and experiences on this important issue. By the end of the session, we hope you'll walk away with practical insights and tools to strengthen community engagement in your own projects. With that, thank you again for joining us, and I'll now hand over to Zaha to lead the rest of the session.
Thank you very much, Ferris. And before I move on to the presentation, I would like to have a check-in question for you all. You will see a poll question pop up in your screen. So the question is, in your experience, how sufficient are communities participating in rural electrification efforts today? On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being very not sufficient and 5 being very sufficient that we don't need to do anything more. Let's take about 20 seconds to respond. And let's see. Great. Thank you all for the poll. Let me see if I can see some quick results. Great. I think from what I'm seeing, nobody voted for 5, that it's very sufficient. Most of the answers are around 2 or 3, insufficient or just okay. So clearly there's room. We all feel that there's more to be done in terms of getting community involved. Now let's talk about the community-centric approach. A couple terminologies to level ourselves a little bit. So community mini-grid delivery model, it defines who owns, finance, builds, operates, and maintains the mini-grid. And when we say community-centric approach, it's not a standalone delivery model, but a flexible set of design principles that can be embedded into existing delivery models and bridge them and can have the opportunity to enhance them. It's no secret that continuous community buy-in is crucial for the long-term success of mini-grids. And from the pool results, we know that there is a need to let communities have more meaningful roles in rural electrification. And responding to this need is why the AMP team set out to develop this Community-Centric Minigrid Toolkit in the first place. The toolkit offers practical framework, outlines the preconditions for such projects, provides guidance to apply those key design principles, along with monitoring, evaluation, learning considerations, case studies, insights. I will only be able to touch on some of these in my presentation today, but I really encourage you to download the toolkit and learn more about it and have a more detailed read. You can access it following the QR code, or my colleague has linked the site in the chat also. Here we introduce the community-centric framework that consists of 5 key aspects. First, the community ownership and co-ownership speaks to the degree community owns the mini-grid assets. Governance structure speaks to how community can have a more decision-making power and more meaningful governance roles. Benefit sharing, as the name suggests, and based on our experience so far, this is most valued by the communities as it can lead to the most tangible results for them. Social and environmental safeguard, or SES, this includes topics such as gender equality and women empowerment. It's a key aspect as the project continues to drive development impact beyond energy access. Last but not least, community investment safeguard to protect community contribution and share proceeds throughout the mini-grid lifecycle. The framework is not prescriptive, and applying them can take various forms. We summarize some of those possible options in the toolkit. And in these slides, we would like to provide an illustration of what the schematic could look like. Here on the screen, it's a pretty typical common public-private hybrid mini-grid delivery, where you have a mini-grid developer builds, owns, and operates a mini-grid, and they may have access to some grant and public funding, such as result-based financing. And a Community Power Committee, CPC, is established to act as the representative of the community. Now adding in some community-centric design. And this can take form of co-ownership and correspondingly X% of revenue or profit sharing from the mini-grid operation. And the developer and the community can choose to establish additional governance body and/or a joint bank account to together manage the benefit sharing proceeds and decide how they would like to spend the proceeds, whether it's to pay for community projects or other arrangement. In the toolkit, we also provide 5 case studies that also illustrate context-specific adaptation is necessary and feasible. For example, around co-ownership, we see a range of no formal ownership to full community ownership. We see profit sharing that are tied to the percentage of ownership sharing. And also we see revenue sharing. Also based on the characteristics and priorities of different communities, projects can also have different focus areas such as supporting agricultural productive use, education, women-led businesses, etc. Nonetheless, the core principles remain, and the key goal is really to empower communities and enhance the equity, the transparency, and accountability among implementation partners. We recognize that we're still in fairly early stage of implementing the approach, and there is still a lot to be explored on community-centric minigrids, and viability is an issue that keeps come up and remains a very complex one. However, we do want to note that we observe some really interesting and promising early trends from RMI Sharing the Power community-centric minigrid pilot projects. Here, as you can see from the chart, baseline and inline survey results show that significant increase in community satisfaction with the minigrid service and tariff after the community-centric measures were introduced. This is not because the rate changed, but as communities are brought into governance discussion and decision-making, they now better understood how the tariff was set and perceive it as fair, as well as they now appreciated the effort going into running the system and providing the electricity service more. This could potentially open opportunities to test different tariff structure and schemes, and we would really like to see continued research and experiments and learnings on the topic. We touch on some of the high-level learnings, such as one size does not fit all. There is always variation, and the approach is highly flexible, and that viability is still a challenge a little bit. And here are some additional lessons learned we would like to share. First, establishing collaborative community partnership really lays the foundation, and public partners can play a catalytic role, especially for scaling. And of course, support and technical assistance are needed for mini-grid developers, public or private, but also for the communities themselves, so that they have a voice to advocate for their own interest. As right now, many of the knowledge and capacity is lacking among rural communities. And again, we're in early stage, so concessional and innovative financing is required to unlock the pipeline. There is opportunity to better leverage public-private partnership, impact funds, and communities' own diaspora funding. And last but not least, social inclusion and women empowerment shouldn't be an afterthought, and it can drive community trust and development impacts. Before I conclude my presentation, I have another poll question for you, which we will be launching now. And the question is, let's see if that pops up. Okay, great. The question is, how would you rate your experience with the 5 key aspects of the community-centric approach? That it's ownership, co-ownership, governance structure, benefit sharing, social and environmental safeguard, structure to safeguard community investment. Again, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being least experienced and 5 being most experienced. Let's take about 15 seconds. Okay, great. Cool. Next, we will have a light Q&A after all the presenters. I'm excited to see that some of you have already implemented all 5 aspects in the project. That's really promising to see. For now, I would like to welcome our next presenter, Frank Verb. Frank is a senior electrical engineer at Enreca International. He's an experienced practitioner for rural electrification with experience in over 20 countries on behalf of public utilities, private sector developers, and electric cooperative. Frank, over to you.
Thank you so much. It's really a privilege to be joining the panel today. I'd like to jump into our slides and offer some historical grounding from the NRECA perspective on 90 years of history and community-owned infrastructure for electricity. So NRECA International, we're an NGO actually that supports rural electrification over the past 60 years in a variety of contexts. Next slide, please. And I think I'll start with a misconception. A lot of people assume that the United States is electrified by for-profit utilities. That is true in most of the white areas on this map. But in the colored areas on this map, the electricity infrastructure is owned 100% by the community in the electric cooperative model. So the rural electric cooperatives, there's over 900 of them in the United States. They form NRECA, the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, and that is the parent of NRECA International, where the NGO that I work for helps to expand the rural electric cooperative model and the lessons learned from rural electrification across the globe. So 42% of distribution lines in the United States are actually owned by the customers they serve through the membership in the electric cooperative, including all of the colored areas on this map. Next slide, please. So while we talk often about mini-grids, we use color photos, but in talking about electric cooperatives, this is a very old and well-established model. In the 1930s, the rural electrification rate in the United States was about 10%. There was a Rural Electrification Act, created a Rural Electrification Administration. You use that same acronym, REA, for many of the public sector partners working to electrify countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Next slide, please. And the success story was, this was after the private sector for-profit utilities were very good and very effective at electrifying urban areas. Next slide, please. But chose not to expand the electric utility model into rural areas. The U.S. government realized that for agriculture and other rural economic activity, rural livelihoods would depend upon improved access to electricity. And so they provided public sector loans to groups of farmers that could band together and form cooperatives, and then build their own infrastructure and maintain it. Cooperatives are not an unfamiliar concept in many places in sub-Saharan Africa. Everything from agricultural cooperatives among growers to credit unions or lending circles is very well understood. And this is the same was true in the United States. Next slide, please. So within about 15 years, within 2 decades, the rural electrification rate in the United States grew from 10% to 90%. So an 80% increase in less than 2 decades. Once the power was given to the communities that were unelectrified, we really saw a tremendous increase in the access to electricity. And we believe the same is possible worldwide. Next slide, please. So over half of the land mass of the United States is powered by infrastructure that's 100% community owned, including 42 million people. Next slide. This is not just in the United States. So NRECA over the years, oftentimes with funding from USAID, as well as the World Bank, as well as other funding partners, have helped many countries to achieve universal access primarily through the electric cooperative model. In Bangladesh and Philippines, we piloted with 13 cooperatives and 2 cooperatives respectively in the 1960s and 70s. Today, there's more than 25 million cooperative members in Bangladesh, more than 12 million cooperative members in the Philippines. And the largest electric cooperative in the world is actually in Bolivia with over 800,000 consumer members. So there have been some remarkable success stories. It's an idea that in some ways it's so old, it looks like new, the concept of a community-centric electric utility. It's not that the community-centric part is unknown, it's just the community-centric mini-grids that is new. And I want to just kind of ground everybody and reassure you that it's not as an exotic of a concept as you might think, because indeed it's the most successful and most tested rural electrification technique in the global South. Next slide, please. So what is an electric cooperative? So these are private sector utilities. They're not government owned. They're private sector utilities. They're operated as a sustainable business, but each cooperative member owns an equal share of the business, and then they can vote and democratically select the board of directors from within the community. There's no foreign or external control over these cooperatives. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there's going to be checks and balances and trade-offs between the members, the management, and the board. Next slide. These are the 7 principles of electric cooperatives, and we'll just jump ahead to the next slide, please. So these are I'm going to go through 3 case studies. So in Liberia, NRECA helped to develop the Liberian electric cooperative to Total Electric Cooperative in 2018, and they've been operating the mini-grid since then, sustainably, solar mini-grid. Next slide. There's some photos from the installation and then some of the community. Next slide, please. In Zambia, earlier this year, we started operations with the Tatumbila Electric Cooperative, Zambia's first electric cooperative. Next slide, please. So this community has been operating for about 9 months now with agricultural processing. You can see an electric hammer mill there for maize milling. Next slide, please. And then in Uganda, the Katirwe solar mini grid has been operating since 2021. And this is a community with a lot of dairy production, and so there's a milk chiller, so that it's two milk chillers are operational in the town to keep the milk from spoiling between the milking of the cows and the arrival of the milk truck, which could be any time of the day, and the milk needs to be kept cold. Next slide. So some photos of the implementation there. Next slide, please. So what the message I'm trying to leave with you today is electric co-ops and community ownership of community-centric mini-grids is an idea that's so old it looks like new. And many mini-grid developers, including I think those of us on this call, all agree that community acceptance and community ownership is a critical success factor in the operation of solar mini grids and the durability of rural energy access. The question is, if we all agree that community ownership is important, I think the question is what percent, right? So oftentimes we'll have folks emphasize community ownership is critical to the success of mini grids, and yet they're favoring a development model where the community owns 0% of the co-op or has no opportunity for revenue sharing or has no governance support and input. Exactly the same comments that were mentioned in the previous presentation. We actually, there's a lot of shades of gray between 0% community ownership and 100% community ownership in the electric cooperative model. And we'd like to continue to help bring the communities into the foreground of their electrification and energy access. And we believe the community is certainly the heart and soul of energy access, but it's also the compass that'll steer this infrastructure into a sustainable future. So with that said, thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thanks a lot, Frank. And next, I would like to welcome Ayu Abdullah. Ayu is the co-founder and managing director of COMET, Community Energy Toolkit, a software platform that facilitates community engagement. She also serves as the executive director at Energy Action Partners, a nonprofit focused on capacity building and community-driven energy access solutions. Ayu, please take it away.
Thanks so much. Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. So my name is Ayu, and I am the managing director of COMET, or the Community Energy Toolkit. We're a community engagement software platform for mini-grids that grew out of a nonprofit called Energy Action Partners, which has worked for over 10 years on community-focused energy systems and community development. Thank you so much for having us here today and for giving us the opportunity to share about COMET and how COMET is used to support community engagement throughout multiple stages of mini-grid project development. Next slide, please. So before jumping into what COMET is, I kind of wanted to share briefly where we're coming from when we created COMET and what community engagement really means to us in practice. So oftentimes when we talk about community engagement in mini-grids, we think about building community capacity so that systems can be used and operated more effectively. And this is very important and something that we support at COMET. But for us, meaningful community engagement really does go a lot deeper than that. And we believe that it means that key decisions sit in the hands of communities. And in our work, we see communities practicing those decisions across three main areas. Firstly, making sense of what electricity is used for in their lives. And this is about meaning and value. And when people can link electricity to things that really matter to them, safer lighting, refrigeration, education, that value becomes very visible and affordability and willingness to pay start to make sense to them. Secondly, on agreeing how to use, share, and manage systems fairly so that it continues running. And this includes understanding service levels and rules, how many hours do the mini-grids run, what limits feel acceptable, what happens when demand grows, and what happens when you have payment, non-payment. And this is really where we see governance sitting in daily lives. And lastly, deciding on livelihood ideas and what feels realistic to communities and what kind of support is needed, and which enterprises feel real enough to invest time and resources into what extra help is required to make them really viable. So for us, being community focused and centric really means giving communities the space, information, and tools to explore these areas for themselves and to have these decisions. Next slide, please. And so what is COMET? So COMET is a virtual mini-grid simulation software used in facilitated workshops, such as in this slide, where communities get to role play their electricity consumption. And from this image here, you see that we deploy COMET in these workshops where members of the community come together and they work in groups of households to build out their individual energy consumption profiles. So COMET really does become a tool for how communities can engage with mini-grids. Next slide. And so you have two types of participants in COMET. The workshop facilitator usually role plays as a mini-grid operator, And they start out by building a virtual mini-grid system for participants to play with. So they can build out a solar system with a specific size, for example, that has system limits and constraints and with a set tariff. Next slide. And on the community side of the software, end users or participants of the workshop will see this user interface and dashboard where they get to purchase appliances and plug them into their houses, as you can see on the screen here, with the individual boxes representing different appliances. The workshop facilitator or operator will begin the Comet clock, and then participants kind of turn on and off appliances by clicking them on and off. And this builds a load profile that you see here on the right. So we would run a workshop where we run through these simulations, and then at the end of a simulation, participants actually receive a monthly bill that's based on these load profiles that they've role played. Next slide, please. And so through different mini-grid scenarios and simulations, participants get to experience operating appliances. They get to see how much it really costs them when they get this monthly bill from the simulation. And they get to work through decisions on appliances, which ones are most important to them, and then collectively as well, because all of these consoles are connected through a network. They get to decide on system sizes and limits, tariffs, payments, and what type of governance structures would work best for the community. We've used Comet in over 110 communities worldwide, from North America to East Africa, Southeast Asia, where I'm located, and the Pacific as well. We've used it in different settings and environments, as you can see. And so far, it's been really interesting to engage communities using a tool like this. Next slide, please. Our most recent workshops were actually in a cluster of indigenous communities here in Malaysia, where I'm located. And so I kind of wanted to just talk through how Comet was used throughout this project cycle. So Comet was used at different points throughout project development. Early on, we used it to validate system sizes and build household demand as well. Once household systems were installed, we shifted the focus of Comet to building local businesses and productive use. So we ran very specific dedicated PUE workshops where community entrepreneurs simulated day-to-day operations. They chose appliances, they set their operating hours, they worked out how many people would be required for different businesses, and they were immediately able to see the impact on their monthly energy bills and on the system limits. For the community, this turned a lot of very vague business ideas into concrete plans. They came up with realistic schedules, a clear energy budget, and had a better sense of the level of commitment that was required for these businesses to run. For the project implementer, Comet really produced very specific signals around which enterprises were ready to move, what additional support was needed, different types of trainings required, and what demand could reasonably be expected to be like in the first few years. So this added value was not just engagement, but clearer business pathways for the community and more grounded expectations and targeting of resources for the project. Next slide, please. So to close, I just wanted to kind of situate where we see Comet in this wider conversation. For us, Comet is first and foremost a community demand-side tool. It gives communities a structured space to practice decisions about electricity in their lives, service levels, and rules. For program owners and developers, that same process becomes something that you can work with. You can produce demand curves that are grounded in these community choices, tariff comfort bands, and concrete productive use options that have already been discussed and tested through Comet. So for us, Comet is not a separate model, but just a layer that can sit inside community-centric mini-grid programs and toolkits, such as AMPs, whatever the ownership or operating structure looks like. And if any of this kind of resonates with you, we'll be more than happy to explore collaborating with different partners and see how Comet can support the communities that you serve. I have a last slide here, and this is just a very quick 14-second video that's just meant to give you the vibe of a workshop and show how it's extremely interactive. Communities get very excited and engaged, and just the overall how fun it is to actually also run Comet. And I will leave you there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ayu. And I think, and I will encourage, let's move on to the panel discussion where our presenters will also be part of the panelist and can answer questions as they come in. And please, I encourage all of you to continue to use the Q&A functions to submit questions, share your ideas and thoughts, and we will have plenty opportunity to hear more from the panelists. For now, I'll pass it over to my colleague Collins, who will moderate this session.
Thank you so much, Ziha. No, thank you so much, Frank, Ziha yourself, and Ayu for such an insightful speaker session. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone. Like Ziha said, we've come to another important session of today's webinar, a panel discussion on community-centric minigrids. So over the next 30 minutes or so, we will be hearing directly from these 4 experienced practitioners who bring hands-on knowledge in designing, developing, and implementing minigrids across Africa. They will be highlighting specifically what has worked, what has been challenging, and what lessons we should carry forward as we seek to deploy more community-centric minigrids across Africa. My name is Collins Dazi, and I will be moderating our discussion today. First on our list, we have Sasha Flesh. He is a senior international development and renewable energy expert with experience across Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, where he's contributed to major work on community-centric minigrids, particularly under the Africa Minigrids Program. Our second panelist is engineer Washima Mide. He is the co-founder and CEO of Product Power, a Nigerian-based clean energy company dedicated to unlocking rural economic potential through reliable, sustainable power solutions for agribusinesses, households, and institutional users. Our third and fourth panelists, whom we've already heard speak, Frank Bear, and the senior electrical engineer for NRECA International, and Ayu Abdullah, the MD of Comet, have already been introduced, and so I wouldn't bug you with their profile. I highly encourage everyone to share questions for the panelists as we go through. This first round of questions is centered on, or will try to highlight the foundations or the primary building blocks of community-centric minigrids. And if we go to the next slide, just so we see the poll. So dear panelists, this was the poll that came up, and it looks like 50% at least of the respondents agree that communities have not been very much engaged or participated in rural electrification efforts. About 50% of us said very insufficient, and it's all sufficient. I would want our panelists to speak on this, beginning with Washima, that what key design principles or elements must be in place from the beginning to make a minigrid truly community-centric. And I invite you to use real-world examples on factors that must be true to ensure that minigrids have long-term community buy-in and ownership. Thank you. Washima, you are muted.
Hi, Collins. Hi, everyone. Thanks for setting up this session. So essentially, I think one of the most important things that we found out from our engagements with this model is just ensuring that you engage with the community in a very, very detailed way. And I mean, just like my colleague from Comet mentioned, like you need to engage with them, with the different, user groups, just to understand like what they want, even beyond, beyond energy, like what makes the community tick, what they want, how they function. And so one of the most important things I would say is community engagement, just asking leading questions, asking the different user groups, women, the men in the communities, the youth as well. So those are that's the most important thing I'd say.
Yeah, no, I'd invite Sasha to share your thoughts too. Thank you so much, Washima.
It's Collins. Yeah, I mean, along the lines of what Washima said, I think it's finding that champion as well for your project and that anchor community member where you have a good working relationship and hearing of different perspectives. not only talking to community leadership, but also groups such as the entrepreneurs, the women groups, the development officers, and having a very broad perspective and very large ears to say, and hear that wealth of perspective and bring in consensus. So there's a lot of mediation, right, Fushima, that has to be going on from developer point of view.
Awesome. No, these are great. Ayu, when you were presenting, you spoke along these lines and particularly mentioned that key decisions must remain in the hands of the communities. I'm curious to know from your experience in highlighting the factors that must be true, what are some of the trade-offs that you've had to balance, i.e. trade-offs along the lines of prolonged community decision-making versus the speed of deployment?
That's a really good question. And actually, so because I'm also involved in our nonprofit organization that continues to also work very closely with communities to deploy energy systems. And right now we have 4 active communities that we're working with, and they're all at different stages of community organizing and coming together to build the committees and institutions and governance structures within the community to be able to do community-based systems. And really, I mean, the depending on, how you structure the project, it can range from being very patient with and letting communities, kind of take their own time to get to the point where they can have their own governance structures. But then sometimes you have project deadlines that you have to work with. Obviously, and so those are definitely trade-offs that are coming from external factors, right? That have some say over the project, and so sometimes you kind of have to make those decisions. But for us, it's really making sure that the community is informed and aware of what those decisions mean to them, and the consequences of those decisions for them. And that's why I said, like in my presentation, so for us, it's the decision-making power, and then however they decide is kind of how we would support that project and the direction that it goes in, as long as the community is making those decisions.
Well, interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. And Frank, just curious to know if you would agree with Ayu's reflections. When you were presenting, you made one statement very clear that the concept of cooperatives and community ownership is not new, so use black and white, very well noted. Just curious to know if this challenge of trade-offs is also not new and how you have navigated that in your experience, and if there are other challenges as well that is worth highlighting on what prevents minigrids from being community-centric. Yeah, please do highlight them. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think I don't mean to oversimplify this. The minigrid business is not simple. It's challenging to run one of these businesses profitably, or at least at a break even, as a cooperative would do. And in all of the same challenges that exist for kind of normal for-profit minigrids also exist in cooperatives. And so we may need to go a little bit slower to make sure that we have the community buy-in, that we have social inclusion. You can't have a meaningful election for a board of directors to guide a co-op if there's some socially excluded or marginalized group. And for some reason, it might take time to discover. We want the voices at the table, intergenerational voices, old and young, different political movements, different racial and ethnic groups, people who are relatives of the chief or people who are not relatives of the chief. We have to control across all of those different axes within the community, and making sure there might be some communities that aren't a good fit for a community, for a 100% community-owned model because of underlying social factors. Just like there are communities where the houses are too spread apart and it's not a good financial opportunity for a mini grid. So that all goes into what it is that we do. But there's the famous proverb: if you want to go fast, run alone, and if you want to go far, run together. And I think that's why I use black and white photos. I mean, there's no question that I can't find a solar mini grid with 90 years of experience, but I can find a lot of electric cooperatives that have been around for most of the last century, and that's a testament to the sustainability of the model.
Oh, no, very interesting. You raise very, very critical, important issues, Frank. Issue around cost. So to what extent the cost of engaging communities are reflected in the cost of minigrids. That's an example. So that's the issue of cost. You also did mention that perhaps not all communities are a good fit for minigrid. Washima, you have raised over 10 million in debt and grant investments, and you are currently spearheading over 170 million project for that's a gender-based smallholder economic liberation project. I'll be curious to know how you have reflected the cost of engaging communities in some of these projects, and to what extent that has increased or decreased the community buy-in in those projects.
All right, thanks, Collins. Yeah, so essentially, I mean, like we've come over the years. We founded in 2014, and we've come to realize how important it is to engage communities when developing these projects. And it can have different sort of effects. I mean, just the right sort of engagements will make neighboring communities want to adopt the same model. When engagements are done properly, it can trigger additional investments across different sort of sectors. You know, so a mini-grid could inspire like another company to invest in education and things like that. And overall, it strengthens the relationship with the community. So even things like recouping your investment with those underlying, you know, community ownership models, they know, okay, if the mini-grid developer has made this investment and we co-own this and there are additional benefits from this, then we have to rally all of the members of the community to sort of pay the tariffs or, you know, not indulge in energy theft and things like that. So yeah, it's been really, really essential. And what we've done as a company is to have community engagement specialists embedded within our teams, just to make sure we're able to engage properly, and just, you know, being very open-minded with learning. So I mean, we've engaged with gender experts from different you know, companies just to understand how to engage women meaningfully, especially because like where we work, it's mostly sort of the norm and the structures are mostly, you know, male-owned enterprises, or, you know, across northern Nigeria, you know, the middle region of Nigeria as well. So we have all of these, you know, structures. So we engage with people just to know how to engage with members of the community, the different members of the communities, and get women and the youth meaningfully engaged, and just make sure that we're able to, you know, have the right framework for environmental and social inclusivity in how we build out our systems and our mini-grids. Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot, Washima. You repeated the one word that has been coming up in this conversation. You used community engagement specialist. Community champions have come up. And so there is indeed a role for that one person to play in ensuring that the community starts along with the project. Sasha Flesh, I will be coming to you. You have experience managing global energy access interventions across Sub-Saharan Africa with organizations like SNV, GIZ, and RMI. From your experience, what is the go-to approach, or how would you say an organization should go about identifying that community champion, or that one person who is able to lead conversations in a way that ensures long-term sustainability of these mini-grid projects? And as you reflect on this, if you can share experiences around the trouble of having different community representatives not agreeing on some of the fundamentals of the mini-grid.
Colin, so I mean, there is no one size fits all. I mean, I can just share a bit of a background of what has been the case in Nepal, for example, where working with communities or municipalities on energy planning. This includes mini-grids and cooking and the like. It was customary and successful to use these community engagement officers, in our case, and build a working relationship over 2-3 years to bring energy plans to life. And that means hand-holding community, backstopping, capacity development, co-developing materials that are going to be distributed with the community buy-in. So it was very traditional technical assistance approach, you'd say. But finding that champion, it's not it's something what you do when you go to the community. It's an agreement with an informal contract, you could say, with a community who would put one person up in front and say, okay, he or she would be the go-to person responsible looking after your connection, or the key account manager, if you could say like that, would look into these things. And in most cases, we were lucky to get good and dedicated individuals driving the energy projects, the planning for the good of the communities. Going ahead and just picking a person does not go that well. I mean, it needs to be decided by the community leadership, and have the backing there. But always keeping in mind, just because a person has been nominated or put forth by community leadership, it does not necessarily represent the viewpoints of every single individual or of the majority of the community. So having an open ear and eye for those sensitivities definitely helps. Does that sufficiently answer, Collins?
It does. No, I saw Ayu kept nodding, so I will invite Ayu and I would also ask Ayu and Frank and Washima to share practically, because we want audiences or participants to go with real world experiences. One practical challenge, perhaps along this chain of community representatives or community champions, or outside of it, that you have faced in trying to develop community-centric mini-grids, how you addressed it, that if you were able to solve it, and if you couldn't resolve it, some of the lessons you learned. And so, yeah, would go in that line. Ayu and then Frank and Washima. Thank you.
Yeah. So alongside COMET, we've developed a few different types of activities that we normally would use to engage with communities. I think, Washima, you were saying that you always have community engagement specialists on your team, and we're similar. We usually have people trained in anthropology also to that have a lot of experience in ethnographic methods, for example. And so a lot of our activities are based on ethnographic methods. And so we usually do a series of activities. One is social mapping, and that's to kind of understand the community from all these different aspects, not just, like we also try and understand the institutional structure of the community, their resources, their assets, all these different things across different maps. And through those activities, you usually find that you spend a lot of time with the community, and then you tend to start seeing the dynamics of people within the community, and see, you'd start identifying some potential candidates. It's always a combination of finding those people through these activities, but then also respecting the local institutions and governance structures, who may also be the ones to suggest local champions and local champions that will work with you. And so it's kind of a combination of that. And I think it's just spending time with the community and being on the ground with them enough to be able to identify those community champions to work with. I think I'll pass it over to Frank next.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share. You asked for a field example, and I'll share one. I don't think I've shared this one publicly yet, because not all stories are happy, right? So we had an issue in the Liberia, the Total Electric Cooperative that I mentioned in my remarks. This is a cooperative, it's a community along the main highway between Monrovia, the capital of Liberia, and the border with Ivory Coast. And the entire interior of Liberia is unelectrified. It's just, if you drive that highway at night, it's dark until you hit Totoda. You get 3 minutes of light, and then it's dark again on your way through. During COVID, there was a lightning strike that actually damaged the inverters in that mini grid. And I'll spare you the technical details, but the cooperative was faced with a choice. It's COVID, supply chains are very complicated. I wasn't vaccinated for COVID at the time. I wasn't able to make a trip into Liberia. And so the community had a tough choice. The board members convened a general assembly. They invited the community to take a vote. If we keep the power, if we don't do anything, we have no power until the end of COVID, or until we can get an inverter, and until our local, it's not just dependent on my travel. I want to make that clear. There's local technicians that could have installed inverters. What is not dependent upon me at all. But it was going to be several months of no power, or we increase the tariff and we run the grid 100% diesel. 100%. And now that is not the pricing model that was used to create the tariff for the community. Roughly doubling the tariff. Okay, but COVID is a time people wanted to have access to healthcare. People wanted to have babies were being born. They would rather not be born in the dark, right? There's so many reasons. There's businesses that are doing cold storage of agricultural, meat, produce, agricultural products needed to be kept cool so that they could be transported from Monrovia to Ivory Coast and back and forth. This community was a key economic hub in the interior of Liberia, and the community voted overwhelmingly to increase their electric tariff, doubling it, to keep the lights on for a period of several months until we could make the necessary repairs. And I don't say that because I'm proud that the lights went off. I say that because I think the community model, the cooperative model demonstrated resiliency. The community agreed to sacrifice. They agreed to take on a challenge to pay more money than perhaps they had budgeted, or to cut back on their electric consumption for the good of the community, so that healthcare, education, and economic activity, rural livelihoods could continue despite extreme adversity. And while that's not impossible in other mini-grid business and governance models, I think it's a true testament to the social cohesion and the democratic, self-governance and autonomy and the community sovereignty that can be achieved within the electric cooperative model.
Oh no, this is super interesting. I have a follow-up, but yeah, I'll go to Washima and then I'll come back.
Okay, yeah. So one real-world example was we're setting up a 400 kilowatt mini grid, and we sort of took for granted community engagement, and we had some level of engagement, but nothing very in depth. And after some time, we started to see some disinformation going around. So there's somebody in the community who started passing across information that the project was his project, and he brought it to the community, and it just created a lot of conflict. And what we had to do was to just start to engage the community for a period of 3 weeks. While all of this was happening, we had to stop work because the community gave us like a stop work. We needed to understand, how this project came to be, who the project champion is, and who was making the investment. Meanwhile, we had loans running on the project, and we couldn't really do anything, right? So it was a very, very challenging situation, and we had to engage. We had to get some of the more external stakeholders involved as well. But then all of this could have been avoided if we had engaged properly across the different user groups in the community. So it's super important. It shouldn't be taken for granted. I mean, after that, we decided to get somebody in-house to handle these engagements and just keep them very consistent. So it's very important to do that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Before I come back to Frank, Sasha, you have worked very closely with donors and with policymakers across continents. From the experiences shared by Washima, Frank, and Ayu, what would you say are the most important lessons policymakers and donors should take from some of these experiences to ensure that scaled-up programs remain community-centric?
Well, I think it's talk a bit about the incentive structures, right? Going from connection-centric to community-centric. I think that could be the shift in mindset that needs to happen, be it in monitoring evaluation, in your impact metrics, in your payment or grant payment metrics. This might, obviously, our current TA, technical system modalities and financing instruments or programmatic approaches might be strained, but rethinking that and looking at how we can, talk about climate resiliency, local economic development, security, safety. I mean, building holistic and safe and prosperous communities as a result of rural electrification, rather than saying, yes, I made 5x connections. I know it's the challenge is much bigger and greater, and not to diminish any efforts that are ongoing, because it's difficult enough to get connections out there. But just that mindset shift, that would be helpful too, bringing the regulation, bringing the financing mechanisms, and drive the conversation towards that goal. I think that would be helpful.
And yeah, no, thank you so much. So Frank, I'm going to come back to you. And this is very similar to a question that someone asked, Jane Birungi, that from your experience with the prevailing tariffs in Africa, how long does it take to recoup initial investment of a particular mini-grid? And I am tying this to the point you made because it's kind of interesting to see a community come together to agree to a sudden spike in the tariff. So if you could share some of your reflections on this. Thank you.
Yeah, this one's there's not one answer to this question. I typed one in the Q&A, but it's I'll answer it live here, which is that there's so many different factors, there's so many different assumptions baked into financial modeling. If you want to say, and Ayu's here to talk about this, Washima's here to talk about this. If you want to look at an area that's never had electricity and you want to look into a crystal ball and predict exactly how much electricity and how much revenue is possible, there's a million different methodologies for doing that. I would say that the payback period is entirely dependent upon the modeling, and all models are wrong, but some are useful. I've seen models, ranging from 3 years payback to 20 plus years of payback. I would say what's important is that the blended finance matches the expectations of the return and profitability. Furthermore, I would say that what's being presented now, like when we talk about business as usual, for-profit mini grids, and their ability, we do a lot of national electrification analysis across sub-Saharan Africa. More than 15 national governments have asked NRECA to model their national electrification plan and strategy. And we usually find that the mini grid piece is, it depends on the country, depends on the geography, but maybe between 10 and 20% of the unelectrified population will be most beneficially electrified by mini grids. There's a lot of parts that are going to be added to the grid. There's a lot of parts that might be completely off grid with solar home systems. Among the chunk that's optimized for mini grids, probably it's less than half. The majority of those are not profitable within a 10-year payback because of their geography. So when we talk about if we're only going to limit ourselves to for-profit solar mini grid development, we're looking at maybe a 10% increase in rural energy access in sub-Saharan Africa, maybe a 10%. Okay, so we need to consider models that include diversity of governance, and we can't limit ourselves to just what is profitable within 10 years, because what's being offered right now in terms of financing is 10-year debt and nothing more than that, and it's being heavily subsidized by incentives, grants, public sector money. And when the public sector puts money into these programs, the community gets no ownership. So there is a good, I think, if you could just do community ownership proportional to the level of subsidy, now you have a model where the community is part of this process and the public sector's goals of autonomy are adequately reflected in the projects. I would also say, and this is important, is that in the US model that I said, and I kind of said, well, so much stuff was done by the co-ops in the US, 80% increase in energy access within 15, 20 years, that was with 35-year debt. Okay, so debt was being offered, public sector finance, 35-year payback period on debt. No mini grid developer is getting more than a 10-year payback on their debt today. That would make a huge difference if we could take a longer view, but the financial sector is what it is. These are perceived as risky projects, and there's a risk-adjusted rate of return, and there's a risk-adjusted term of debt that's made available. So if we could have public sector debt at 35 years, now I think my answer would change quite a bit, but that's not offered today.
Yeah, very interesting. I'll come to you, Washima. You kept nodding. I want you to reflect on these, and particularly if you could speak to how the cost of community engagement evolves or changes across the project implementation life cycle. So from the initiation to the implementation to the operation phase, and not just the cost, but how the extent of community engagement changes, and perhaps the goal and the objectives changes across the project implementation life cycle.
Okay, yeah, so essentially, I think, so usually the way we do it is we engage at the beginning of the project. And so that's kind of like sort of like a holistic engagement, just outlining the objectives of the project and establishing a framework for the community to kind of understand how, or just have an idea of what we want to do, and then also get their feedback to incorporate in our design. And, as the project gets implemented as well, we continue to engage. So you're engaging more just to make sure that everybody understands, what's happening. Like they understand and they see how it connects to them as well. And you're also getting like, more, feedback as to what you can maybe correct or do better during the implementation. Remember that the projects are not supposed to just, during the construction, you're also creating jobs. You also need people to be meaningfully involved in the project. So you need to continue to engage. And at the end of the project as well, you need to also continue to engage with the community. So even during the operational phase, I'd say it's a continuous process. You need to keep getting like feedback from the communities. You need to understand, where the pain points are at the different stages of project implementation and operation. So really throughout the lifespan of the project, you continue to engage. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Ayu, you want to share some thoughts on this, on how community engagement changes across the project implementation lifecycle?
Yeah, I think definitely agree with you, Ashima, that community engagement it has to exist all throughout. And then I suppose it would change depending on also, as you go along with the project, you might build out different structures to deal with different parts of the project as well. I'm trying to think actually of like how community engagement changes. You still want to have the same values and definitely around communities still making key decisions. Our projects also will change. Yeah, I have to think about this one a little more. I have to also say that it's 11 p.m. for me, just so I've had if I seem a little slow, that's also why. Yeah.
Makes total sense. Yeah, no. Yeah, no, thanks
I did.
thanks, Chris.
If it's okay though, I did kind of want to add to something that you were asking Sasha earlier about the policy. I kind of want to mention this mini-grid program in Malaysia. It's in the one of our eastern states of Sabah in Malaysia, and it's the state with the lowest electrification rate in the country. 400 very last mile communities in remote geographies, mountainous terrain, and so very challenging. Grid will not reach there. The state, however, we've created a public civic partnership where there's a group of civil society organizations that are partnering very closely with the state to design and implement a rural electrification program that is very much community-based. And it's an interesting, I think, model of how, at least in Southeast Asia, you can have a very close partnership between the government and civil society organizations with all the experience on the ground of running community-based systems. And actually, policies there's been a new policy and target of 100% electrified by 2040. And then also the support of this community-based model all throughout the delivery program. And how that's going to look in practice is that when the proposals and the bids are put together, there's going to be a very strong focus of having community consent, community participation through FPIC processes as well. That's kind of an interesting model to look at to see how community involvement ownership can be part of a program that's being scaled by government.
Right. No, thank you so much, Ayu. So we have a couple of questions from the participants, and so we will be taking a few. But before that, we really want to say a very big thank you. Very, very insightful conversation. Given that you were the last, Ayu, I would want to start off with you. There's a question here from Kiga Benyo. It says, I'm interested in your simulation. What model or methodology do you use to ensure that the different outcomes, such as cost of energy, emission reductions, and local job creation, are evaluated without trade-offs?
Are evaluated without trade-offs. So for the COMET simulations, the logic behind the simulations and the model is just technical in terms of creating a simulation of the consumption and the generation profile and things like that. everything else in terms of making decisions on tariffs and making decisions on productive use, those are actually done through discussions with communities. So it's still a very high touch sort of tool. And this was very intentional because we didn't want to take away these decisions from the communities. And so what we created was a flexible tool that would enable those discussions and for communities to also be more informed and sort of experience it through the simulation to be able to make those decisions. So there's no straightforward answer here because it depends on the community. And again, like Frank said, there's just such a wide range. And when Frank was talking about how some communities are willing to pay more, we see that as well with COMET simulations, where depending on what the community values, they might actually choose to pay a tariff that's higher as long as they can get what they value and what matters to them. So that's kind of how I would answer that question. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Ayu. Keeping an eye on the clock. Sasha, there is a question here from Scott Kennedy. Is there currently an over-reliance, say, by funders and mini-grid program managers on mini-grid developers to lead on community engagement and participation? And then there's a follow-up. Will the sector be more successful by creating funding streams and specific packages for third parties to work in community engagement in support of mini-grid developers? And as you share thoughts on this, Sasha, it would be good to reflect on, say, the role of other actors, say, beyond mini-grid developers in ensuring community-centric mini-grids. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Scott, for the question. And just a short answer is, I'm not sure whether it will make the sector more successful. But you're right, the mini-grid developers are the jack of all trades. They need to engage the community, look into the financing, look into productive use, do the capacity development. And I think there is an over-reliance by technical assistance programs or the rural electrification agencies on this very delicate organization like the developers. They have a node, they're the node where everything happens, more or less. There are instances where you have, especially for gender equity and social inclusion, you might bring in CSOs to support with different components, or even demand stimulation. You might have a CSO come in for productive uses, more like an agricultural extension kind of organization that will help the community figure things out. That's where the capacities of developers might be more limited, depending on developer. The more, and I think from a technical programs standpoint of view, the more players you need to integrate, the more coordination effort you need to, invest. And I have the impression that we as technical assistance programs often prefer the easier route via one party. It means one contract, one report, one instance, that one review, one monitoring evaluation mission, rather than having 5 or 6. So yes, I do see an over-reliance on developers that need to do so many things. How to solve it at the moment, I don't really have an answer to it, but maybe the other panelists might have ideas.
I might jump in here if I may. And I think it's a great question, and that's why I also mentioned earlier that public sector could play a role, that they could at least support some of the community engagement and participation. Like, for example, for one of our work in Nigeria, we partner with the Rural Electrification Agency, REA, particularly their unit called RUECS, Rural Electricity Users Cooperative Society. That's a special unit that sits under REA, and they supported some of the sensitization with the community, and especially when there is tension between the community and the developer, they could sort of play that intermediate role and come in as this trusted partner for the community. And again, linking to the point I made earlier, that we also need someone to advocate for the community's behalf as well, to make sure that their interests are protected, and that the developers, even though we trust that everyone come in with goodwill and care for the community, but to have that level of validation is still helpful.
Thank you so much, Ziha. And I will end the Q&A from the audience with Washima. There are specific questions for you if you could quickly respond to that. And the first one is, and I'll put all of them together, is there a developed timeline for engagement across the communities where you operate? And how often do you engage the communities where you operate? And perhaps you could, I think you've already highlighted these ones, the challenges you face, basically. And so if you could speak to, like, if there's a timeline on the communities you engage and how often you do so. And this question is from Solomon Obadiah. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the question. So in terms of engagement, I think usually you engage for a couple of days at the initiation phase. So basically you have, town halls, and then you focus on specific user groups just to make sure that you answer all of their questions and clarify areas of, that are not very clear. And then you keep engaging. So you also set up the community power committee, very essential, essentially just comprising of all of the different user groups in the community. So if they have questions and they need to pass them over to you as well, they could do that through the committee. I mean, these are usually trusted members of the community, so they reach out to them, and you have this meeting with them from time to time. And our model was particularly interesting because we set up a community reinvestment committee. Essentially, it's a committee that was supposed to sort of meet with us and deliberate on areas of intervention that the community wanted. So we had this kind of constant engagement with the community to identify specific projects beyond energy access that they wanted to, develop using their share of the proceeds from the project. And so things like water access or productive use. And so we're able to get that consistent feedback from the community. And then obviously from time to time, just engaging beneficiaries to understand, where challenges are, pinpoints, what they need us to do, even beyond the information we're getting from the committees. So it's a consistent engagement process, and we do re-engage. So you send our people down to the field to re-engage with the community and with community members, just to make sure that systems are working as they should, and we're getting real feedback from members of the community. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. So we are out of time, but I'm going to ask just one last question in 30 seconds. I'm going to do Frank, Ayu, Sasha, and I'll end with Washima. In 30 seconds, if an organization approaches you that they're going to build their first community-centric minigrid, what one advice would you give them?
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I think I would have to say that a community-centric minigrid implies ownership of the minigrid, and that the long-term sustainability of the project is going to require meaningful governance, economic participation, and community control in order for that to be truly community-centric and sustainable.
I think I'm going to cheat a little and say I'm going to add on to Frank's answer and just say that, I mean, if you're going to approach this community-centric model, you need all of that, plus just being very open to learning and listening and listening very actively to the community in order to really understand where they're coming from.
Okay, yeah. So I'd say they need to be willing to participate beyond, just funding. It has to be a very transparent process where everybody knows what's happening. And so, I mean, it goes back to the point that you made about, learning and being very open-minded. So that's kind of what I'd encourage them to do. Yeah.
And adding to the others, I would say be in it for the long haul. Maybe you have a technical viability of 20, 25 years with these systems, but I mean, the community is there forever. So be committed and choose the right community.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Frank. Thank you, Ayu. Thank you, Sasha. Thank you, Washima. This has been very, very insightful. Yeah. Over to you, Ziha.
Thank you, everyone. This is indeed a very rich discussion. I will try my best to recap some of the key points, and I think a lot of it resonate with me at least, and I'm sure with many of the audiences as well. Today's discussion really highlighted that while mini-grids remain a proven and cost-effective solution for rural electrification, the long-term success really depends on meaningful community involvement. As we heard today, the community-centric approach can yield critical benefits. In particular, we heard how putting community first can strengthen the rural electrification and energy access effort, such as establishment of cooperative, more collaboration between the community themselves and the developers. All those efforts can really strengthen the longevity and resiliency of those projects. It's not a new approach. It has been tested and is most successful in the Global South. And there's something that UNRECA has piloted in Liberia, Zambia, and Uganda. And RMI also have done some work in Nigeria. And we've also have experience that we reference from Burkina Faso, Ethiopia. And as Frank said, communities are the heart and soul of energy access and the compass that will steer us into a sustainable future. But how we actually do this? Our speakers also demonstrated that very practical ways to operationalize their community-centric approach, from structured engagement tools to learnings from the ground implementation, which is super helpful to learn from those real-world experiences. As IU noted, community engagement means that key decisions sit in the hands of communities, and the engagement should really ensure that the communities are informed and empowered to make critical decisions that impact them. And during our panel discussion, thank you for great moderation, Collins, building consensus and engaging stakeholders across the community rather than just those empowered are critical. We also heard that we need to be patient. Sometimes it takes time, well, almost always it takes time to ensure that inclusive participation. And it really takes that going extra above and beyond from the partners involved. Another message we heard several times is the importance of identifying a champion within the community themselves, and to support the project and ensure that the project's long-term sustainability. And as Sasha and Washima noted, finding the right community champions is critical for the project's success. Finally, the context is key when determining the approach to take, whether regarding the ownership structure or even the decision to implement a community-centric projects, and the design of any of those must consider the specific community priorities, dynamics, and where it can create the most value to the members. We hope these insights support your future work in designing more inclusive, resilient mini-grid projects. The toolkit and today's discussion are only really trying to serve as starting points. And we really like to invite all of you to adapt, learn, continue to experiment, and share lessons as you apply those principles in your practice. And together, we can refine and reshape the future of mini-grid deployment. We also encourage you to join the AMP's community of practice to discuss and share insights on the topic further. You can indicate your interest in a survey later, and our team will follow up with you about joining. And that concludes all our discussions and presentations for today. And if you have a few moments to spare, we would like to hear any feedback that you have. You could access the survey using the QR code, and we'll also paste the link in the chat where you can access the survey. And with that, I thank all the speakers, panelists who joined us today for such a great, insightful conversations, and all the audience for joining and your interest on the topic. Thank you very much. And we will follow up with the recording and the slides of this webinar, and also share the link to the survey again. We really appreciate your feedback and participation. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day.